It's quite comical, actually, when you realize the difference between reality and what some people are talking on TV about.
It's November the 16th. Yesterday's newspaper, the Northern Advocate, had an article on the front page, "Farmers brace for next big dry." It mentioned that weather experts say Northland has a 20% chance of a second consecutive summer drought, but that the region's farmers are already preparing for another big dry. Well, it's good that they are. It mentions, according to Andrew Tate of the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, the ground is much drier than it should be for this time of year. Well, that's certainly the case. It's rained very little in November, and this lawn here, for example, that's normally nice and green, but brown patches have started developing on it, which is highly abnormal. And this is the second drought. This appears to be a drought on its way that we've had this year. There's plenty of evidence to show that weather modification technology is being used. It's been used globally, actually, and it's been used here as well, but this article doesn't mention anything about that. It's the 26th of November, and it's about 7:40. There's some interesting material in the sky this morning. It looks like they've had an aerosol operation, and the material's been spreading out. Did look like a trail.
I needed to figure out why the trails were there so I could get on the bandwagon, if you will. What I did in 2005 was I bought 4 webcams, 2 computers, and some time-lapse software, and then set them up, in different directions looking around the house. And more so not for the planes, but to figure out what the clouds were doing. I needed some insight and some information so that my forecasts were more accurate. I needed to understand what they were doing. And after about 4 months of time-lapse photography, there was something that I captured in April of 2005, and it was a series of about 8 flights, just out over. I was in eastern Idaho at the time, just out over the valley, and there was one plane that stood out from the rest of those, and that one plane's trail persisted. It lasted, like 6-7 minutes, whereas the others lasted maybe 10-15 seconds. But what was interesting is when this one persistent chemtrail showed up, that it had a behavior. Let's just say that there was a gap in the middle of it, and it just looks like part of a segment of the trail is missing. And then 3 other planes hit the center of that gap, and then 2 other planes kissed the end of each of those of where the trail began again. I'm like, oh, they're up here setting up resonant geometry in the atmosphere to guide the jet stream. And so where you see the trails being laid down is exactly where they're inputting energy into the atmosphere to manage the weather, to manage the jet stream, to channel certain segments of it. You slow the jet stream down by 10-15 miles an hour. You do a ripple, you run the ripple against the flow of the jet stream, and it's just like throwing up speed bumps up there. You'll get wave clouds, but the air comes out of that gate, if you will, running a little bit slower. But 3 days down the way, you don't know what that's going to have an effect on, 1,000 miles away.
Right.
So what they're largely doing when they're engineering and you see the trails overhead is not for you, but for hundreds, if not thousands of miles downstream. And so they take what weather is coming and accentuate it a little bit. And they'll accentuate, say, storms coming into the western U.S. They'll do that work in the Gulf of Alaska. For the ones, headed into Europe, they do it between, Iceland and Greenland. And you can see chemtrails all over the North Atlantic. The North Atlantic is rife with them. And so that dirty air, it has been airborne for days and then begins to fall out across the U.K. So, I mean, that was my conclusion of what probably 98% of the trails are up there for, is for weather modification and just to keep tabs on what the atmosphere is doing. You'll lay a trail across the sky and you'll see it fold over, or you'll see a helical twisting. You'll see, the powder puffs, coming out at the bottom. Mm. And those puffs will give you an exact rate of descent that the air is doing at that particular spot. You'll see those powder puffs do, spirals around the trails. All of that is information that they can see from space, that they can see from other aircraft, and it's data they need to put into their models to then output, whether they're directed energy scalar, acoustic, orgone manipulating, is doing. And is it working? If it's not working, then they'll apply another electromagnetic solution, run another series of flights out there to measure it, wait 20, 30 minutes, see how the trails deform, behave, drift. If they're happy with it, they'll leave it alone. If not, boom, they'll run another EM solution, run another sortie of flights out there to see how it's behaving. And they need those different chemicals up there so they can discern from space and from planes the different layers that they're working with. Mm-hmm. Some trails are pink and some are blue. Some are pale white with a little bit of a blue tinge, and some are rose-colored, and it's all just different chemical mixtures so they can keep track of the different layers and how they're moving. So it really is brilliant, and I got to hand it to the guys that came up with it. It's brilliant. Mm. It's brilliant. It just needs public oversight so what they're doing benefits humanity, and it doesn't just benefit the powers that be. And that's what I'd like to see come from all this, is public oversight.
It's quite comical, actually, when you realize the difference between reality and what some people are talking on TV about.
You took the mark of the devil just so you can eat and breathe. Bowed down at the feet and surrendered liberty. Tyranny and terror, corrupted dictators, posing as your leaders while they poison every leader.